Thank you so much, Sherry, for inviting me to be part of this wonderful panel. In changing the conversation in higher education, it is important to have a voice. And so I'm going to tell you a story about how I created agency for myself in a department and was able to change the conversation about how we work with student writers. So my story starts in the Philippines 12 years ago when my husband at the time was working at an international research station as a postdoctoral fellow. I had a young child and was expecting my second and didn't quite know what to do. I had just gotten my PhD in biology from the University of California at Berkeley and was trying to figure out what my next step would be. So I applied for a position as a postdoctoral teaching fellow at Duke University in the university writing program. I was one of the first scientists that they hired to teach academic writing, and I thought for sure that I had fooled them, because what did I know about teaching writing? In graduate school, I had thought very deeply about the fact that we don't tend to work with students, our science students, in teaching them how to be scholarly writers. We ask them to write scientific papers, but we don't teach them how to construct a scientific argument. We ask them to write in groups, but we don't teach them about collaborative writing and how to do that. So I was very excited to have this challenge. When I arrived in Durham, North Carolina, which is just down the road from here, my partner decided that he had found his forever job, and I was looking around going, what am I going to do? Because the postdoctoral fellows in this program, there are no permanent positions in the university writing programs. They're all postdoctoral fellows. So I quickly decided that to try to find a place for myself, I had to associate with a department. So I was able to create a joint postdoctoral position with the biology department. And when the biology department hired me, they were thrilled. They thought, great, she's going to come and she's going to fix our student writing. Some thought that I would be like a writing tutor or that maybe I would be a grader. Oh, what a great job. So I thought, no, I don't want to do that. But what I did want to do is I wanted to help create systematic change in our department and how we worked with student writers. So to do that, I had to help create a change in our culture. The most important thing that I did, I think, was to start with talking to the faculty and asking them, well, what do you think the problems are with student writing? And what do you think students should be able to do as scientific writers? So together we created a tool, which is called BioTap. It's the Biology Thesis Assessment Protocol. And that tool has three functions. The first function is a teaching tool. And as a teaching tool, it has two parts of it. One part is to model professional scientific peer review. Scientists interact with others when they write, and they have reviewers, and they get feedback, and they respond to that feedback very systematically. And we use that process to work with our thesis writers. We also have a series of rubrics that articulates very clearly what the expectations of the faculty are, and that was very new for us. We hadn't done that before. The rubrics can be used for assessment, which is the second big goal of this tool. And assessment was used for reaccreditation and for a departmental assessment to see if our students were developing the skills we wanted them to be able to develop as science writers. But most importantly, the assessment fed back and improved our teaching. And so the third outcome of this tool, which was a big surprise to me when I started this, was how it has become a faculty development tool. In the last 6 years, we have doubled the number of thesis writers in our department without increasing our staff, and without me being the grader or the writing tutor. So our faculty work more efficiently with students, and our research has shown that the quality of our writing, the student writing, has improved over this time, even as we have doubled our capacity. We created this tool with input from our faculty, with input from the university writing program and the goals of academic writing across the campus, and with input from our Office of Assessment so that this is a reliable tool that can be transferred to other contexts. So we now use this tool across our university in different departments. I don't have neuroscience on there, but we are working with them as well right now. And it can be used in other universities, so it's not limited just to our institutional context. So again, I'm thinking, well, this is great, but how do we move beyond just changing a practice in a department to having this viewed as scholarship. And so the language of scholarship is publications. So I was very intentional about making sure that this was public and published in places that my peers would not only be able to find, but also that they would recognize as scholarly. So we've published descriptive work. The bottom publication is just a description of what we did, including how we got faculty buy-in, which I didn't know how important the reviewers thought that piece was, but they really wanted me to talk quite a bit about how we changed the culture. We've also published it with engineers as we've extrapolated this to other departments, and we have papers currently being developed in chemistry and economics. So that is how we changed the culture in our department and at our institution. And then we were thinking, well, how can we take this beyond just our institutional context? So we got an NSF grant, and with under the umbrella of the Reinvention Center, my colleagues and I used the same model at the national level. We brought faculty together from all of these different disciplines to ask the question, how can writing be used as a tool to increase learning in science? We've then published that, and at my webpage, which is science-writing.org, all these publications are there. And there's a link to a searchable database, because the goal of this work was to have there were three goals. The first one was to develop a sense of community around these questions so that the community was asking the questions rather than us just delivering the answers to them. They were asking the questions and working to find the answers collaboratively. The second goal was to create a searchable database, and I'm going to show you that on the next slide, but I have to warn you because it's an overwhelming slide if I don't give you some warning. It's a database of research studies that have addressed how writing can be used as a tool to affect learning at three different levels, at the introductory level, the advanced level, and the capstone level. So the first column, it shows the different learning outcomes that you can search on. The top row is the different disciplines, and then inside, when I remove this panel, you'll see the matrix. Each cell has the level, the course level. So anything that you see in bold in those cells in the middle identifies a gap in the literature. So what that tells us is that there has been a lot of research done, but there are still plenty of gaps in that we just don't have the research yet to understand what best practices are in some of these areas. The final goal of this national effort was to create a heuristic model, mechanism of effect model. If you look at research across disciplines, across contexts, you need something, some model to have it be systematic so you can compare across these contexts. Otherwise, the research is isolated and is not terribly useful. So our model is to understand what the role of a specific practice is, a pedagogy or writing to learn practice, and in improving a very well-defined disciplinary specific learning outcome. This third level is through impacting, mediating, and moderating variables. So that helps us understand why it works. For example, is it affecting metacognition? Is it simply more time on task? So we need to understand why a particular practice works because the contexts are all different. So we need to be sure we articulate what the institutional and the course context are in all of our research. So the next step is that we got another NSF grant, which is in its second year now. It's a collaboration with these 4 universities to look at what the mechanisms of effect are in promoting writing to learn, we're trying to promote both critical thinking and advanced writing skills at the capstone level across in biology departments across these 4 different universities, and then within Duke University across 4 different disciplines. We're looking at biology, neuroscience, chemistry, and economics. And I'll end my part by saying that much of my research is summarized in this book, which was edited by my collaborator and colleague at Duke University, Bob Thompson. And I don't have time to go into what it is now, but it is a much larger study of 13 universities that all do systematic research to help us understand how we can change the conversation in higher education. So thank you.
Good morning. I want to engage you for a minute or two in looking at this. Can you tell me what you see? We'll have a little of Lee Shulman's rich description, I hope. So if you just shout out, just name some of the details that you see for me, please. Footprints, okay. Light. Sorry, I can't. Rocks, okay. Water, okay. Well, already you see, in talking of the footsteps and the light, you have named some of the SoTL characteristics before us. Now let me explain what this is about, the one and only slide I intend to use for the 10 minutes. This, thank you. So, 385 million years ago, a creature known as a tetrapod walked across this trackway, and for reasons geographical and geological, which I am not expert to comment on, left his tracks in the sediment and then the sands and rock of time. 385 million years later, we can tell everything about him and about the time. My question to you this morning as we leave this wonderful conference is, in 385 million years, what will be left of our teaching and our students' learning? How do we avoid extinction? How have we tried to do so in Cork, where nothing, of course, is ever extinct? And we are the real capital of the country, by the way. Now, this is the tetrapod trackway in Valentia Island in County Kerry in Ireland. And in 2006, Dr. Betty Higgs and I co-founded the Teaching and Learning Centre at UCC. We were blessed to have a wonderful practical visionary who inspired us before that, Professor Anya Hyland, who has often been at these conferences and is now Professor Emeritus of Education at UCC. She's still very involved on so many levels, but just not with us at this conference. And we had been working with Anya, Betty and I, for years before that. A Teaching and Learning Centre doesn't happen overnight. But I'll talk a little of that in a moment. What is important, I suppose, about this image for a start is that it brings together the first thing you need in running a teaching and learning centre. You have to have two people who will get on together, but also who bring different strengths. And Betty comes as a geologist and a scientist, and I come to it with a background in the arts and humanities and also in education. So this kind of brings together as well both of us, because on the one hand we have the scientific geological perspective, and on the other hand I see this as a sign, a symbol, a metaphor for the work we are doing in SoTL. Because to me this is a trackway, a journey. It shows that we have to set out, we are beset by uncertainty on every journey. We're not sure where the tracks will lead. But it does, for me, chart metaphorically where we are going. And so Betty and I and the others on the team, it's wonderful to have here too, I must say, Dan Blackshield is with us, who has taken lots of our courses and now works on our team, and James Cronin and Catherine O'Mahony from NAIRTEL, our National Academy for the Integration of Research, Teaching and Learning. So all of us are trying to run along that trackway in different ways together. So what I want to talk to you about for the next few minutes is, you know, some ways that we've been trying to work. The first thing I suppose to say is that we have found, trying to work in the centre, Betty and I and the team, is that you have to start where the faculty are at. Now, this old constructivist principle ain't quite as easy to do in practice as it sounds in theory, but it is a very sound principle, and there's also a socio-cultural aspect, of course, to it. But starting where the staff are at, in our case, there are 4 colleges: the College of Arts, Celtic Studies and Social Sciences, the College of Business and Law, the College of Medicine and Public Health, and also the College of Science, Engineering and Food Science. So that's a lot of voices. So what we tried to do initially, from about the year 2000 on, when funding started to come from the Higher Education Authority, and there were programs for training of trainers and initiatives that we could get funding for. We try to think of all of these as bringing, many voices to the table. And of course, when you think of voice, you think of listening. And our job really was to listen to that cacophony of voices, and not so much to try and conduct the orchestra, but to let the thing emerge, to let the voices speak for themselves. So after I suppose how we really began in that time was we had a lot of open sessions, and Anya started those, and Betty then took on that mantle of running the lunchtime sessions, which she still does as one of the many tasks we have to do. And we invited, for example, Nona Lyons, who of course had been a great disciple of Lee Shulman. So Lee, you were in there from the beginning. And she gave us a wonderful, if you like, introduction to the portfolio concept of documenting and inquiring into our work. And that was key from the beginning, that it's at once documentation but also inquiry. And so for a year or two, we gradually built that community of practice together, and letting our faculty come and read portfolio entries, maybe on how to construct group work, how to involve their students maybe in new ways of assessing, and so on. So those lunchtime sessions were invaluable for building the community, for opening up the issues, for beginning to give us a public face within the organisation. By 2004, having listened to the voices, it emerged that our faculty were looking for courses, accredited courses, to validate what they were coming along for. And so then we began the certificate, diploma and masters in teaching and learning in higher education, which I coordinate and direct, and I'm helped greatly there by Dan and others on the team. So then Betty and I had to look to that, how we devise that programme. Now, on the certificate, it's interesting in our context, it is not compulsory for our faculty to do courses on teaching and learning. It is strongly recommended for some of the new faculty, but it is not compulsory, and this is the wonder of it. To date, since 2004, because that predated our Teaching and Learning Centre, we now have 400 faculty out of 2,000. So that's about 20% who have taken the certificate in teaching and learning in higher education. And at least half of them have gone on to do the certificate. And we now have 50 who have a master's in teaching and learning. And by the autumn, I hope we'll have about 57, because there are 7 more in the system. So over time, certainly, starting where they're at has worked. So we have for them now a suite of accredited programmes. We also have a suite of accredited programmes for the postgraduate students who come. Initially we just used to have those for orientation sessions, but then listening to their voices again and starting where they were at, they wanted us to be more systematic with it. And so, again, a team of us work on this, and James is particularly involved in that team with us. And we run 2 courses for them, one on an introductory course to teaching and learning, and the second course is about scholarly readings. So we try to take them further in that way. We also have, of course, a suite of awards, let's say the President's Awards for Teaching and Learning, the President's Awards for Innovation and Research in Teaching. We have teaching fellowships and so on. So all of these help to start where the staff are at. Also, we have visiting scholars. So we have been very lucky in the past when Mary Huber has been over with us. We've had one of our colleagues here from Tromsø in Norway, Marachi, was with us. We have Mick Healy has visited us. So again, it's, and Betty organises that part of the work, and it's so helpful. We really need as well to keep opening things up. So we bring people, and then Betty became a Carnegie Scholar and came over here and worked with Mary and others, over the series of a year or 2 in that programme. I spent a few years at the Harvard School working with Anya Hyland on the Multiple Intelligences Curriculum and Assessment Project. So we've had the opportunity to visit and to be visited, and this also is a powerful way of trying to, start where we're at and keep going and be contemporary. So also I'd like now, I suppose, to move on from that first point to say, I think a key feature of trying to establish it within the institution is to realise that teaching and learning belongs to everyone and not only to the education faculty, and I can say that as one of the latter. This is, I think, very key, that there isn't any territorial claim by the education department to think it all out. So what is very key for us is that we see all of the staff all of our teaching staff, and of course they might be librarians as well, or they might be in the disability support service. We see all of them as having a voice in researching their teaching and learning. And I have found it much easier to enter it once I thought of it that way. If we see all our college teachers and librarians, etc., as researchers also, then all we're asking them to do is to identify with that role as researcher and to take off the researcher's hat from the discipline and put it on in the teaching of the discipline. So that, as Mary Huber was saying yesterday in a session, you know, when Glassick, Meerhoff and Huber followed up on the book on Ernest Boyer's book, when we got scholarship assessed after scholarship reconsidered, we came up with the characteristics that are common to all research. So therefore, I think I go through those with those taking our programme, and they become much more certain then that they can work with the SoTL principles, that they are indeed research principles that extend right across the disciplines and are not just, if you like, confined to teaching and learning. So therefore, and another thing I find extremely useful is Randy Bass's wonderful dictum that I'm forever quoting, that we are moving in SoTL from remediation to investigation. I think this is a key thing to bear in mind if you're building or setting up your teaching and learning centre. The staff sometimes terrified because they come with that old-fashioned notion that you're going to say, listen, why don't you talk up, why don't you look out more, why don't you extend your voice, as if we're going to deal with all these behaviourist training things. But this is about investigation. And as Randy Bass so well puts it, the problem in teaching and learning has been like trying to fix things and the thing of seeing it as more or less private property, you know, and territorial claim, and no one comes into my class. This is about opening up the classroom door and seeing everything as problematic in the best research sense. And this is, I suppose, leads me on to say as well that we have to think of our teaching and learning and the integration of research into both as a kind of a CSI process. Yes, on the one hand, we are still at the scene of the crime. And the scene of the crime, indeed, can be the classroom, you know, because very often the students don't learn because of the way we're teaching. However, it also stands for classroom, you know, investigation, but also for that case study inquiry that is at the heart of what Lee Shulman talked of the other day in terms of evidence 3, when you go deep and detailed and down and dirty and come up with the evidence from within. And all that process work of evidence 2 and 3. So to give you simple examples, I said, for example, in the certificate programme, which started last week before we left, I sent a quick memo to the faculty a week or so beforehand, and I said, please bring on your mobile phones a selection of pictures that show the classrooms in which you teach. And we will begin by talking about those. And Dan was telling me that somebody he knows kind of rang him up and said, Dan, is she for real? Like, what's this? You know, pictures of our classrooms, like, so what can I do about that? And the idea, of course, is, you know, faculty come thinking that the classroom is a given. But of course, we are there as the choreographers of space and the designers. So we can, at least by being aware of the space, we can counteract it and change it and critique it and consider how we'll move about it and how we'll draw the students in and so on. So simple ways like that, we can be, as it were, CSI investigators ourselves, investigating the space. Then very other simple devices like the CATs, using our classroom assessment techniques. So in the first year, we get our faculty to write portfolios of practice in terms of teaching portfolios, using Lee Shulman's model and Nona Lyons' model, let's say, from Portfolio in Hand. In the second year, we get them to use Pat Hutchin's wonderful course portfolio model of looking at the design, at the enactment, and at the results of a course, and going down deep into student learning. And in the third year of the Masters, we use Dan Bernstein's inquiry portfolio as a way of getting them to send memos to each other and to peer review and reflect. So there are many ways in which this CSI process works. And I suppose to reiterate as well what Lee Shulman said earlier, I thought it was a wonderful rendering, by the way, his speech, another way of saying all that Donald Schoen had said in Knowing in Action. Because what we are looking for, of course, with the CSI approach is not so much covering laws. We are not looking for the covering laws of pure science. They do not apply. But we are looking for reflective transfer. And I think once we work with our colleagues and explain that to them, that our research is just as rigorous, just as valid and reliable, but it takes a different turn, a reflective turn that you're seeing, I hope, in the light behind us here. Another thing, I suppose, just to say, am I running out of time? Am I about 5 minutes over time? How does it happen in Ireland that you just talk on? Well, then I better close down and finally say that the third thing I wanted to just mention briefly was to say that I suppose it's about making connections and starting, linking out, networking, building a community of practice and trying to really connect from the beginning. Again, faculty come who are new, faculty come who are years in the process. And we found that as well very much with our young researchers in Betty's programme on the postgrad work for the PhD students. They come and they teach us so much about teaching. And of course, a lot of them are like TAs and they do the teaching. So that's a major thing. So back for just finally to look again at our trackway. There are many ways in which this trackway works. Nobody's journey is the same. And we try to honour that people will learn in different ways. And I suppose the wonderful thing about it is, as T.S. Eliot says, you know, we continue exploring. And at the end of our exploring, we arrive where we started and see it for the first time. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Klara Bolander Laksov. This is the building where I work in Karolinska Institutet in Stockholm, in Sweden. I'm a director of a unit there, and I am now going to talk to you a little bit about my journey as an educational developer, because that is what I call myself, at a very research-intensive medical university. And this road is actually kind of me looking back about 10 years, and in 10 minutes or so, I think that we will end up where I stand right now. I'm going to tell you two stories. The first one is about Anna, who contacted me around 10 years ago. She is an anatomy teacher and a neurosurgeon. She started at teaching very late after a career in neurosurgery, and she came back to the university starting teaching. And then her colleagues, her surgeon colleagues, asked her, so why is it that the students who come out to the clinical practice don't seem to be remembering anything? They don't remember any of the anatomy that they should know when they are out in clinical practice. So she came to me and we started a project together. And this project, we decided to interview anatomy teachers and surgery teachers about their experiences of student learning and whether they saw that there were any problems in student learning, and also what kind of strategies they used to overcome these problems. It turned out that most of the anatomy teachers didn't really think there was a problem. They were pretty happy with their teaching and thought that the students learned anatomy pretty well in relation to these maps of bodies and neural systems and muscles and skeleton parts and so on. So they were pretty happy. The surgeon teachers, there were some of them who were really concerned. They thought that there is a big problem, and this problem has been conceptualized as a transfer problem for students not transferring their basic science knowledge into clinical practice. But there were also those teachers who thought, it doesn't really matter what they learn in university because we just have to re-teach them everything anyway. It's like two totally different worlds, and one thing is what you learn at university, the other thing is what you learn in the real world. So this was interesting. And Anna, she went back and we started to look into what examples, what evidence is there, what have people tried to do over the world to overbridge this problem, this transfer problem. The teachers obviously were not aware of these differences and these problems and the strategies that you could take, but they were trying different things to introduce small clinical anatomy courses and things like that. So this was my first example. Another example was another newcomer into academic life, a teacher in cell biology, Matti. And Matti had become the director of studies. He was actually headhunted from another university where he had been working very systematically with introducing, activating strategies for student learning and so on. But when he came to Karolinska Institutet, there seemed to be some problems because the teachers were totally uninterested in teaching. In fact, only 10% of the budget within his department came from teaching and learning, and all the rest was from research. So maybe it's not so strange, but he was still concerned, and he wanted to introduce more modern pedagogies into his department. So he contacted me, and we started a project together where we we conducted a questionnaire where we asked teachers about how they understood learning, and we also asked them to fill out on Likert scales to agree with or not agree with what they actually did in their teaching. And I'm sure many of you are aware of the research base in education that shows how we conceptualize learning in a certain way, and we actually act in a similar way when it comes to teaching. But in our little study, it turned out that actually teachers didn't do as they thought, and they didn't think as they did. So that was kind of interesting, and at that same point I started more and more to be interested in more sociological perspectives on education and communities of practice, and we started to think that maybe we should look more into the environment and where these teachers are. Do they actually talk to each other about teaching? No, they didn't. We interviewed them about this. So, okay, what can we do? Well, the director of studies, Matti, he came up with the idea that if he changed all the seminar questions that the PhD students who were teaching in the department were using in their seminars with students, they would be forced to let students discuss things because they were too difficult. And also, he bought a coffee machine, a really nice coffee machine for the department. And at this department, now people could stop by and have nice coffee instead of the coffee in their own lab room. And after a while, he went there every day and talked to people and asked them about their teaching. And after a while, he noticed that people were actually talking about teaching themselves as well. And they were talking about the questionnaire that we had handed out. So, what is the difference between these two projects? Well, so this was like the first step of my development of working with educational development in Karolinska Institutet. The first difference could be that if you use, Anna Svärd has come up with a very interesting paper on how you view learning, and that one way of viewing learning is learning as acquisition, and another one is viewing learning as participation. And in the first, the Anna example, the anatomy example, we actually looked at learning as acquisition in a way. We were trying to find out what's in the head of these teachers. How do they think about learning, and what strategies do they use? That's what they say that they use. But in the other example, the Matti example, we started to look more into teachers as participating in something, and their learning as participation. Also, in the first example, the data collection that we used was a view where we were like interviewing these teachers, and it was a neutral action to interview them. However, in the second one, the questionnaire that we used, that actually became an intervention. So the questionnaire was a way of impacting that environment. The relationship in the first example was that I was a subject because I'm an interpretative researcher, and I have had objects as the interviewees in our study. But in the next one, there was more of a subject-subject relationship, where we were actually starting to negotiate together the outcome of this project, and there were also workshops and other ways where people contributed to the outcome of this project together. And I was one of the members. Also, in the first project, there was a movement from looking at theory, maybe educational theory on how people learn and the strategies that are available. They should be applied into practice. But in the second example, it's much more focused on the iterative process. It goes back and forth. You can't say that theory should be implemented, but theory can also be constructed from practice, and it goes like in a circle. So the focus for the SoTL work here, in the first case, is really on teacher thinking, or, I mean, an equivalent could be student thinking. And the second example is more of a communities of practice perspective, where we need to create and contribute to the development of these communities of practice. And this has led me on to the next step, or the next direction in my work, which is about bridging the gap. Because what Anna Svärd says about acquisition and participation metaphors for learning is that we cannot choose just one. We need to do both. We need to work with thinking and practicing, and we need to think about several levels, the individual and the group. So what I have been working on for the last 4 or 5 years is to support development of communities of practice, both at departmental or programmatic level, but also at mid-management level, because I think they are very, very important people to enable teachers, individuals, and teachers as groups change. And they can bring in new perspectives and get new ideas for how to work to bridge the gaps of theory and practice and of different communities. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm going to start with a quote from Margaret Mead, who said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." Unquote. So this plenary reveals our belief in the power of the small group. Most of us account for probably 1,000th of the faculty of the institutions we represent. And relative to our audience, we are a small group indeed. But despite our size, I like our chances of success, because I love the title of this plenary, Changing Higher Education One Step at a Time. So there is a reason we remember Einstein's theory of relativity and the Beatles' Abbey Road. It's because those moments of revolution are so rare. But in our advocacy work, let's remind ourselves that most sustainable progress is slow, and it is incremental. If we do, it can lead us to think about one step at a time improvement on two fronts. First, we should advocate for giving individual teachers the platforms and tools to enhance their abilities, step by step. Second, we should advocate identifying and involving the people who are truly passionate about pedagogy and learning, the people who will be the next champions at their institutions and leaders of organizations like ISSOTL. So at the beginning of my career, I know I would have been appreciative of a roadmap for both of those journeys. In fact, I began my career in desperate need of support in developing my teaching skills. If Prosser and Trigwell's scale had been around when I started teaching in 1981, my transmission teacher-centered behavioristic score would by itself present a rich case study. Fortunately, my teaching career did not end then. With help and experience, I built my skill set, I tried new approaches, I made teaching a higher and personal priority. And I learned, as Randy said in the closing of the opening plenary, to observe, to analyze, to discuss, and of course to celebrate. But when I looked for help and support from within my department, the pervasive culture made teaching and learning an invisible part of what we did. Any effort to enliven that culture was very quickly squashed. And ironically, this vacuum forced me to look further afield. And I can say now that it was grit that helped me to look further. I ended up on faculty and university-wide committees. I became involved with our Teaching and Learning Center and with various task forces and working groups with names I don't remember. But these were structural opportunities that not only provided me with information, support, and inspiration, they served as filters that identified the most passionate and stubborn advocates of teaching and learning. I also gained invaluable experience doing the frontline work of faculty and curriculum development and other services my peers took for granted. However, real change seemed slow to arrive, and my work felt circular, and I did not yet have that perspective and wisdom to notice the marginal growth occurring around me. Once again, I felt like I faced a choice. Allow myself to be swallowed in the inertia of the pedagogically indifferent, or to take another step. So the next step was another expansion of focus, this time beyond the campus to regional and national organizations that were more diverse, more aspirational, and more capable of connecting me to a true community of practice. Many years ago, I became involved in the Society for Teaching and Learning in Higher Education, or STLHE as it's fondly known, or STELI. And as president of STLHE, I helped our small organization of about 16 volunteers, people who had also emerged from the filters of their home institutions, to galvanize a membership that had grown to almost 1,000 faculty, including some 60+ institutions. It seemed like we were really going somewhere. Step by step, I had made it to a place where I felt part of a critical mass of people who shared my desire to change. And like ISSOTL, STLHE is an organization with ambition, so much so that we launched an associated charitable organization called Teaching Learning Canada to serve a broader audience, to enlist and inform a Canadian public, and to spread the gospel of the business of learning. So at that point, my addiction, I hope, is apparent. I had passed through every filter of the Dominion of Canada. Could this be the time to go global? Well, many of you know about ISED, the International Consortium of Educational Developers. This is another terrific organization composed of representatives from 23 national networks, which is now working with Teaching Learning Canada and hopefully ISSOTL to inaugurate a new platform for identifying champions and pushing innovation. We're calling this project the Learning Exchange. Scheduled next fall, Learning Exchange is an invitation-only forum designed to gather a diverse panel of visionaries to imagine the future of post-secondary education. Our goal is to assemble a roster of about 24 leaders, including entrepreneurs, artists, scientists, academics, activists, policymakers, and community leaders to discuss the direction, potential, and innovation of learning. Our goal will be to produce innovative, actionable ideas, and we're devoting resources to pilot select ideas from the learning exchange after the forum is over. So that's the description of the steps I took. And my experience may reflect yours and may stand in contrast. But as the people most invested in learning, we the people in this room, we have a responsibility to make it easier for others to join our cause, because while small groups are powerful, slightly larger groups are more powerful still. And that responsibility should manifest itself through our advocacy work based around two questions I mentioned earlier. First, are we assisting the development of individual teachers? This likely translates into advocating for the inauguration, expansion, or support of the kinds of platforms that have been available to me throughout my own career. We should ensure that the rungs ahead are clear to a person just stepping on the ladder. Second, are we facilitating the identification and maturation of new leaders for the teaching and learning family? Our mission here is to find the true champions of our work and then connect them, support them, and enable them. We can filter them through the system, as has been my experience. We can mentor them directly. We can advocate for the assignment of resources. We can scout for colleagues with the potential to join us. And in the end, we may be fortunate enough to be part of an occasional revolutionary moment or two in our careers, but in the long run, this is a process not of revolution, but evolution. And our efforts in advocacy should be focused on supporting the evolution, step by small step, group by small group. And if we can do that, we can rise from humble beginnings, some of us more humble than others, and put ourselves in a position to make a generational difference to the most mysterious and yet critical phenomena we call human learning. In the end, by the very nature of our activity, that is our focus, I think our accumulation of small advancement will, in fact, result in a revolution, and the tipping point is not far away. We're on the verge, I believe, of unlocking human potential to a degree that would have been unimaginable a mere generation ago. And we all have the opportunity to be part of making that happen, and I thank you very much for listening.